Hello and thank you for joining us here at Mofo RC Garage. Today we will be working on this tiny little C10. This is an SCX24 from Axial. We are going to be putting on a set of the Mofo RC LS knuckles, the low slung knuckles. These are a heavyweight option and a great alternative to standard brass knuckles, as these are beautiful. They come in a black slippery coated surface with little polished dimples in there, little schmimpers, and got the word Mofo RC on it right there up at the top, so you know which side you're working on when you're putting them on. They are 13 grams a piece, which gives you a good chunk of weight right down at the low end of the truck where you want it. And they have a distinctive shape, which most of the weight of the knuckle is going to be below the center line of the axle. So a lot of the weight you're going to want below the axle. These is where you're going to help you right here. We're going to stick these on here. It's going to greatly improve the forward bias of the truck. It's also going to greatly improve the steering radius of the truck, being that these do not have turn stops built into them, such as the stock knuckles and some other branded knuckles do. We do not have turn stops on there. So one thing you will have to look out for if you're on a stock rig, depending on your servo setup, you can actually oversteer with your little dog bones and mess up your dog bones, bend them, break them, bind up, snap, and then you're out of luck. So what you're going to want to do afterwards, we will talk about that at the end, how to set the steering on these. If you're using a stock steering link, you really don't need to worry about it. Most likely he will not need to worry about it, but you can always check to find out. We'll show you how to check that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the body off of this C10, and this is a new C10 from Axial. I believe this is their newest version of this C10. This has the oil shocks standard on it, which is really nice. And they are actually quite nice of an oil shock, being that they come factory on this. They do work quite smoothly. You can see it kind of slowly rising up there in the back when I push down on it. Same thing in the front. And you can adjust these to be a little stiffer. I've already got, well, I guess technically I don't have any extra sprung weight on this. So this is how it will look stock with the oil shocks. I do have some weight below these springs. You would call that unsprung weight. Anything that is not connected to the chassis above the shocks or attached to something that moves when the shocks move would be called your sprung weight. Below the shock line, basically anything attached to the axles is going to be unsprung. We do have a set of aftermarket wheels on here. These are a set of T-reel or T-reel wheels, however you pronounce it. I thought they were just a kind of good looking wheel for this rig. They are kind of vintagey looking. They got a cool bronze color that matches the orange on here. When I bought this truck, I bought this at a competition event in Oklahoma. It was the Crawlapalooza right here. You can see my little sticker here. Crawlapalooza in Disney, Oklahoma, 2024. I bought this rig because I was not very well prepared, and I ended up having to buy a rig when I got there. So, bought the rig, put the wheels on it. They do have a brass ring inside there, which is kind of nice for a little bit of extra weight. I also picked up a steering servo while I was there. This is a Torx brand servo, MLS1022. We'll do a separate review on that later. It's okay. It's not a huge improvement over stock, but it is an improvement over the stock servo. Time will tell the longevity of it, but it does turn your wheels, as we'll find out shortly. And what I'm going to do first, we're going to check the steering angle on this and see what kind of angle we're getting out of this stock. And so what I'm going to do, the best way I've found to do this, turn it on, crank the wheels one way or the other, like so, turn it off while still holding the wheel, and then your wheels will stay the pointed direction that they are already pointing. I'm going to use my little angulometer here and we'll see what kind of angle we're getting right now out of this. So I'm just going to point this the same direction as the wheel and tire, kind of going right from the center there, and we are at right about 26, 27-ish right there. And that's those are stock knuckles, stock steering links. We do have a different servo, which that might help a little bit, but not much. When you don't upgrade the link or the knuckles, you don't really get that much more steering out of this. I'm going to do this, but don't do that at home. Don't crank your servo by finger like that at home. So what we're going to do next, then we got the body off, we're going to go ahead and take the wheels off. And set your little wheel nuts to the side. Don't lose them. Then I'm going to go ahead and just pull off these little hexes and hex pins. Set them over here so I don't lose them. Next, we can actually remove the knuckles themselves and the steering link. Something to look out for on your steering link when you're taking this off. You can check to see what kind of threads you have on your steering link. And there was 2 different threaded steering ball links, or link ball steering knuckle rod, and the little shock ball steering balls here that have a built-in ball to hold your steering link on, and they're threaded little posts. There's 2 different kinds of those. One of them is going to have a fine thread, which is what this one has. And then sometimes they use one with a coarse thread. If you have the coarse thread, you don't want to install that into an aftermarket steering knuckle. You will want to either A, upgrade your steering link, or B, try to find some of the fine thread screws here. Hopefully you guys can see that on the camera. I don't know. Let me get a little closer. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. You obviously can't see it way over there, but up here on the up close camera, maybe you can see it. These ones are the fine thread, so we should be fine there and not have to worry about that. The little screw part that is in that ball, the attached threaded part of that, is very, very weak. So if you crank it in, if it's not a fine thread and you start trying to crank it into the knuckles, it can snap off. And you will not be very happy if it snaps off, because you might not be able to use your knuckles if you snap off that little screw into there. Unless by some happen chance you manage to be able to get the broken threaded part out again. So we're just going to take off both of these. And once you get this knuckle off of here, you can actually just kind of wiggly it like so as you're pulling this out, and get that bearing out. And then you can just kind of shove the other bearing through the front. And then you have just a knuckle. You got a couple bearings. And you can do the same thing on this side. You can just kind of wiggle it with a little force, pull the other bearing out, pull this bearing out, or push this one out rather. And you can reuse or not reuse those bearings. If they're fine, you can just reuse them. This is brand new, so I'm just going to reuse them. But the Mofo RC LS low slung heavyweight knuckles do come with more bearings. So you can just either A, use the new ones, or B, just set them to the side, put them in a little box somewhere, take them with you whenever you go anywhere, and if you happen to break a bearing, or if you don't dry and clean your vehicle after every run like you're supposed to, if you go in water and they rust out and go to turds, then you can replace them. One thing you will want for this job is going to be some thread locker. Anytime you're going into something that is brass or aluminum or metal of any kind, when you're threading this part into the end here, the screw going into this, we're going to want to put just a teeny little bit of Loctite right there before we screw it in. And that will keep that from falling out, and you won't have to over tighten it and worry about snapping a screw off. We, however, are not going to use the thread lock today. yet, because I have more upgrades planned, more videos. Actually, I'm going to be doing today on this same rig, but other videos. So we're going to be upgrading a few things on this rig. Now that I've got these sitting here in front of me, I can take my old bearings that I pulled out, and I should be able to just push this front one in here like so. The back bearing can be a little harder to get in sometimes, and heck, even the front one sometimes can be a little tough to push in all the way. So what I'm going to do on this front one, if you saw my brass drift over here, my little punch I've got, my little rubber / plastic mallet, I'm going to put my little brass tool on this front of this bearing and just give her a little tap. Oh, you can hear it when it fully seats. It goes click, 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 thud. See, that one is fully seated already. Now I got to flip this upside down and put the other bearing in the back. These ones, like I said earlier, can be a little tighter, and you do want to make sure you push them in at the same angle so it goes in straight. You do not want to get that bearing cockeyed when you're putting it in. If the bearing is cockeyed when you are installing it, it can get all wonky in there. And you don't want to put something in there and hammer on it. You know, you don't want to hammer on the inner part here of this. You don't want to hammer on that. You want to try to hammer from the outside area. So you'll want to use something as wide or wider than the bearing, such as what I was just doing, pushing against the whole bearing going in. If you just hammer on the middle in here, you can actually bend and damage all the internal parts of that, and then you're going to end up with a bearing that does not run smoothly or does not run at all. So now that we've got both the bearings installed in both of these knuckles, I can just put my little shaft back in there, my little dog bone outer stub shaft. Make sure it spins freely and smoothly, and it does. You can check this one as well, and it does spin perfectly. The orientation of this, your little stubby part here with the screw hole is going to go on the front, like so. And the big hanging weighted part is going to go towards the bottom. So we're just going to slide that on there as best we can. Give this a little turn to line up the dog bone inside there. And then I'm going to pick up one of these little screws. These are M1.4 by 5 millimeter, it looks like. I'm going to put the little brass sleeve on there. And then I'm going to thread this into the axle housing. Now, if this was an aluminum axle housing or a brass axle housing, I would be using a little bit of thread locker on the screw going into the housing. And you want this to be as free as it can when it turns. Sorry about that. Let me just turn that volume off. And there we go. Okay, you do want that to go in and spin. When you're turning, you want it to be pretty smooth and free and easy to turn. If it's a little bit tight, you're not going to have to worry about that too much. This one is a little bit tight just because everything is brand new. The plastic housing is brand new, so it's a little tight on there, which is fine. And when you tighten these screws, you don't want to crank them down tight. You just kind of want to lightly snug the screw. And either way, if it's going into brass, aluminum, or plastic, same rules apply there. Just lightly snug that screw in there. Don't crank it down so hard you're going to end up stripping it out, or you'll be a not happy camper. Take one more screw and we'll go ahead and put it on the other side. Nope, and I dropped it. Let's try this again. And there we go. And make sure your screw is going in straight, not at any sort of angle, or you can cross thread them. And this is one of the harder scales to work on, honestly, because they're so small. Everything is so small, it just makes it a little bit more difficult to do anything on these. You can see this side's nice and free. So, both those on there. Now I'm going to go ahead and install the steering link. Now when you do this, like I was saying, you would use a tiny little bit of thread locker and then just not crank these down super tight. But I'm not going to be doing that because I'm going to be pulling this right back apart in just a minute to install some fresh new parts. So I'm just going to lightly snug that up, and just less than finger tight is all you're going to need on these, especially when you got the Loctite in there. Just kind of less than finger tight, right about finger. You could even hold this little part of the shaft here and just snug with your fingertips on the little shaft part. So that is installed. Now we can put the hex pins and the hexes back on, such as this one. There we go. And then to the other side. Here we are. Lastly, we can install our wheels. And now, special note here when you're putting the wheels back on, go ahead and put your wheel nut on, and once you tighten it up, you've already over tightened it, and this no longer spins freely. If I can just lightly finger the outside and you see it barely moves, you're going to want to back this off just a little bit. And now you can see when I'm just lightly flicking back and forth on the thread here, the whole wheel and tire will rotate freely and easily. That will save you a lot of headache in the future, and you will not burn out your motors due to an over tightened front wheel nut. And it's mostly the front ones that do this. Sometimes the back does as well, especially if you're using a barrel nut with a hex extender. Those will really do that. The little barrel nut, you won't want to lose that barrel nut, so you'll crank it down good and tight, and you won't even realize it, but you just killed your motor the next time you drive it. You wonder why you don't have as much power anymore. It's harder to get over obstacles. It's stalling out. Your wheel nut is too tight. So just back that off a little bit. You could even use a little bit of thread locker on there, then tighten it up and just lightly snug, back off a hair, let it dry, or just replace your nylon lock nuts if you're running not regular nylon lock nuts. When they start to get loose, if they're coming off, just go ahead and replace them, put a new lock nut on there. It's worth it rather than losing a lock nut while you're out having fun and ruining your day. So we've got that all back together, and super simple, super easy, done. Now what we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and turn it on and see if we got any new, better steering angle out of this. Let's find out. So we'll just crank her that way, turn it off, and let's check what we're at now. And I'm guessing we gained a couple degrees just by putting these new knuckles on, but let's find out how many. Right about there-ish. Looks pretty good. We are at 34.5 degrees of steering. So we just gained approximately 7.5, 8 degrees of steering just by replacing the knuckles to these low blow style knuckles, or low slung, I mean. The low slung knuckles, which is a good chunk of steering to gain. Now the one thing you will want to check next, go ahead and turn this back on, and you can actually just flip it upside down, and when you crank it back left and forth, right and left and right like this, give it some gas, and you can turn it, and you hear it you can kind of hear it maybe, or you can see it, the whole truck. See, it's nice and smooth, 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 and it starts moving just a little bit now. When I go all the way one way or the other, let's see, yep, all the way that way too. That is your dog bones binding up now. So what you could actually do, you could probably be safe running it like this. This is just barely binding up. But if you had much more steering angle than this, let me make sure my directional, yeah, my directional is all the way turned up. So if you have much more than that, when you're cranking it and it's burp, 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 it can actually lock up. And that's where you'll end up getting a bent dog bone or breaking the dog bone. So check that. If it does go too far, or if you're worried about it, you can turn your little steering directional knob down just a little bit, right to where it's a little bit less, like that. So now you pretty much lost your extra steering angle by doing that, right? But it no longer binds. But for this amount of bind right there, I'm gonna go with that's just fine for me, because that doesn't look like it's gonna bind up and break anything. Lastly, you will just gonna go ahead and put the body back on, which we'll just set on there for now for the sake of saving an extra 30 seconds. We are done. Super easy, super great way to gain a ton of benefits. More steering, more weight up front, right where you want it, below or at the axle center line. What else is there to say? Thanks for joining us. Thanks for watching. Really appreciate it. If you have not done so yet, hit that little like button right there. Give me a like, hit the little subscribe, hit the bell, hit any of those buttons that pop up there that might make some sort of difference for this video and help the algorithm. Really appreciate it. You guys have a great day.